What did this mean last night for the people who are now so afraid of what it could mean? All right? That's why I invited Ben Shapiro. Thank you for being here. So, answer that first question. What did last night in New York City, because I don't think Spanberger and Sherrill mean the same thing to you, nor does Proposition 50 in California. What did New York City mayor's race mean?
Well, I mean, it looks like a revenge candidacy, frankly. And I think that what you're seeing here, and what I was listening to what you were saying earlier about the amount of nervousness on one part of the population, the amount of aggression from the other side of the population, I think that's very, very real. I mean, I've been receiving texts all day long from friends who live here, Republicans and Democrats, saying, do I need to leave the city because I'm so concerned about the tenor of Mamdani and what he's going to do next. Now, honestly, the best hope for Mamdani is that the city council stops him from doing many of the things that he wants to do, because if he were actually able to implement many of his plans, it would make him more unpopular. But I think that, as you say, it was an outrage candidacy. I think that because everybody is now in the business of humoring people's outrage and then telling them that only if they are given outsized power will that outrage be alleviated in some way. Because of that, people are bouncing back and forth, because the truth is that most of the problems in people's lives in a free country like the United States are actually not solvable by government. Most problems in individuals' lives are mostly solvable by them. And there are obviously problems that need to be handled by inflation would be a problem that needs to be handled by the government. But when it comes to the idea that pretty much all the wrongs in your life can be solved by the government, which is something Mamdani literally said on the stage last night. He said there's no problem too big for government and no problem too small for government to care about it. That should be terrifying to anybody who has any familiarity with totalitarian systems.
Terrifying. My initial pushback before the Free Press's story today was going to be, socialism, you may not like it, you may like it, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't horrify you, it shouldn't frighten you as a human being the way giving an opening to Islamist tendencies, making certain talk okay. But then I saw them kind of converge in that Free Press story. I never connect socialists to anti-Semites. Like, that's never been a thing for me. But within this same playbook, they talk about the issue.
Well,
is that new?
Well, I don't think it is. I think that the sort of coalition that's formed around it is new, meaning that the sort of radical racialist coalition that's been built up, segmenting populations and by ethnicity, and then combining that with this socialist anti-capitalism movement. And what that really is a grievance movement. It's a movement that says that there is a superstructure that has been holding you down. And Mamdani literally said this last night, and that you need to rise up and destroy that system. And that is terrifying because, as you say, the entire basis of a workable American politics is that if you work within the systems, then you will be able to effectuate change. And as we have actually given more and more power to governments, whether we're talking local governments or national governments, and those problems don't get solved, you have one of two solutions. One is to say maybe we should take the power away from the government and people should actually be left alone more. The other is to say, no, it's just the wrong people in charge and they need even more power in order to effectuate their will and fix all of your problems. And I think that right now it feels like a race to the bottom between a wide variety of characters, none of whom are saying the thing that no one wants to hear, which is government cannot actually solve all your problems. In many cases, government actually accentuates your problems. And what we really need is a culture of personal responsibility and a culture in which people actually make better decisions.
All right, speaking of better decisions, the Jews. 1 in 3.
This always goes well when
right?
The Jews.
You people.
Yeah.
The vote of 1 in 3 Jews for Mamdani. How do you explain that?
Well, I mean,
and by the way, over half of, almost half of his voters, period, said a big reason for their vote was his position on Israel.
Yes.
Which is weird in a New York City election period, even though, you do have a bigger population of Jews than you do anywhere else in the country, but it doesn't usually dominate our politics. But 1 in 3 Jews voting for Mamdani?
I mean, to really understand those sorts of polling numbers, you have to understand the breakdown inside the Jewish community. The Orthodox and conservative Jewish communities voted overwhelmingly for your brother, overwhelmingly. It was really, unaffiliated Jews, people who go to synagogue relatively infrequently, who sort of enjoy social justice politics at their local Reform or Reconstructionist synagogue, who voted in favor of Mamdani. And I think one of the things that when we talk about Jews as an ethnicity versus, say, as a religious community, it's easy to obscure who exactly is voting for what. If you're talking about an atheist who happens to be ethnically Jewish voting for Zohar Mamdani, that shouldn't be a particular shock. I'd be a little more shocked if people like me who wear yarmulkes started showing up en masse and voting for Zohar Mamdani, but I can guarantee you that probably 99.8% of that population went for your brother.
That's an interesting distinction. I appreciate that. I didn't see it that way. It's actually comforting. But the last point is, Ben, don't take this so seriously. They were demonizing this guy. You see how he's smiling all the time. It's just talk. Globalize the intifada. He says it means different things to different people. He's got to be respectful of his own background, but he's not one of those guys. He's not the Brotherhood.
I mean, very difficult for me to believe that when he was literally asked on national television whether Hamas should disarm, a position currently held, by the way, not just by the Israelis, by the American government, the Egyptian government, the Saudi government, the UAE government, the government of Bahrain, and the government of Qatar, by the way. And he refused to answer that question. That was the sole question about the Middle East, apparently, about which he holds no opinion whatsoever. But he does have an opinion about arresting the sitting prime minister of the state of Israel, who, like him or hate him, he has no right to actually arrest on American soil. You know, Mamdani is, I think, driven by this particular issue. It's why he got into politics in the first place. As a college member of Students for Justice in Palestine, it has been an animating issue for him forever. I would be shocked if it doesn't remain a core issue for him moving forward. And obviously, if you're Jewish living in the city and you're already worried about elevated rates of crime against you, which has been happening now for several years, I think that, let's put it this way, every Jew that I know in the city of New York feels significantly less safe today under a Mamdani administration than they do under Eric Adams or they would have under your brother.
But where are they safe? Because on the left fringe, you've got what we're seeing in New York City. On the right fringe, you got your former brothers there, you know, and sisters, Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, that are rabidly anti-Semitic. What is going on here?
So, I mean, I think that one thing that ought to be noted here is that Mamdani was just elected mayor of New York. The people who you're talking about, who I'm speaking out very, very loudly against right now, that they actually do not have a foothold in elected office. There may be a couple of members of Congress who I think are sort of aligned with them, but the idea of a major national politician who's mirroring that agenda, that seems really outsized. Right now, President Trump obviously not anti-Semitic. I think the vice president is anti-Semitic. I don't think that the Speaker of the House, who spoke out against Tucker Carlson, and the Senate Majority Leader, both of whom spoke out against this, are anti-Semitic or even want to be associated with that kind of content. You're talking about commentators. You're not talking about elected officials. And so while I am deeply concerned about this, very, very so much so that I spoke out extensively about it this week and will continue to do so, I think that that's still a step removed from where the Democratic Party is, where it's become part and parcel of a large part of the progressive base elevating somebody like Azar Mamdani. That was a feature, not a bug of his campaign. I think everyone outside of New York watching that race saw Mamdani say these insane things about the Middle East, about Israel, and they thought, how can he win in spite of that? And they missed the point that he won.
Especially here.
And they missed the point that he won because of that.
Yeah.
I think one of the other perceptions that people miss is the fact that New York City is just as Muslim as it is Jewish. Right? 11% of the population here is Muslim, 11% of the population here is Jewish. And so the idea that he won, like, you know, the Jewish city, I mean, again, then it's the Muslim city too.
And will become increasingly so. Ben Shapiro, appreciate you being here. You're always welcome to have the conversation. I would just say this, though. Who am I talking to? I'm talking to somebody who's known from the digital realm, just like these other commentators. You guys have a lot of power.
I'm not downplaying it.
That's all I'm saying.
fighting it.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.